This is NBC Nightly News, reported by Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. And now the number is 191 in the Beirut massacre. 191 Marines dead in the explosion at their headquarters at the Beirut airport. And while the families of the dead were being notified today, President Reagan was defending his decision to keep those Marines in Lebanon. Tonight we begin our coverage of the many dimensions of this story with Vic Aiken in Beirut at the site of the explosion.
As each layer of wreckage is cleared, more bodies are discovered. Cranes and bulldozers shift the heavy concrete, revealing holes and crevices which could hold a survivor. But Marines here say they don't think anyone else will be found alive. The clearing operation has also revealed the remains of the truck used to carry the bomb. Marine investigating teams are going through as much of the debris as possible, searching for clues to the identity of the man driving the truck. Some information is already known.
The man was wearing green fatigues and driving a yellow truck, and as he went by him, he tried to pull him out of magazine because it wasn't in his weapon, because we're not allowed to have it in his weapon. Tried to pull the boat carrier group home, and by the time he got everything loaded, the man had already exploded the weapon, and there's nothing he could do. And he says as the man went by, he says he'd always remember that the guy was smiling.
Marines in the center of the base don't carry loaded weapons unless the unit is in a state of alert. No one in authority here is prepared to discuss the lack of heavy security at this checkpoint yesterday. Today, it was heavily guarded. The Marines in this area live and work in an operational international airport. Roads adjoining their buildings are used by airport and airline personnel. Some of the roads have now been blocked. Mobile patrols within the base have also been increased. Marines who had been out of the country on liberty were rushed back to Beirut today to help get the unit back to strength. The French have also tightened security as they continue to search for survivors in their blasted command post. And today, French President Mitterrand flew in to encourage his troops. The Marines and the French say that their morale is good and that they will stay in Lebanon as long as necessary. President Reagan and President Mitterrand have also reaffirmed their commitment to Lebanon. But Lebanese believe that there will be more attacks on the multinational force, and they wonder how long it will be before the American and the French people demand to have their troops back home. Vic Aiken, NBC News, Beirut.
This is the greatest foreign policy crisis of the Reagan administration, and tonight the president is facing some very tough questions about the role of the United States in the Middle East, the security of the Marines there, and the prospects for a wider U.S. involvement. As Chris Wallace reports from the White House tonight, the president tried to get a jump on that criticism today.
Concerned that public and congressional opinion may now swing against his Mideast policy, the president today stated the need for Marines in Lebanon in the strongest possible terms. Mr. Reagan told a group of out-of-town journalists that U.S. interests in the Mideast are at stake, and that the Marines must remain to stop Soviet aggression.
It would be a disaster if a force took over the Middle East, and a force is ready to do that, as witness what has taken place in Yemen, in Ethiopia, and now the forces that, some several thousand that are there in Syria. The free world cannot stand by and see that happen.
Today's statement marks a dramatic shift in the definition of the U.S. role in Beirut. The Marines were originally sent there to permit the PLO to evacuate. They were reintroduced after the Beirut massacre to shore up the Lebanese government. But now, the president says they are blocking a Soviet domino theory in the Mideast. If the president is determined to keep Marines in Beirut, he said he has no intention of escalating their role and confronting hostile forces.
We would then be engaged in the combat. We would be the combat force. We would be fighting against Arab states.
As a security measure, the president said he is considering putting support troops like those which were attacked offshore, which would mean 300 fewer Marines in Beirut. And the president said there is strong circumstantial evidence that pro-Iranian Muslims carried out the attack. One official said privately, U.S. retaliation may never be announced, explaining some people may just disappear. But the president's main goal today was a selling job. White House polls show a deep public concern about the U.S. role in Lebanon, which officials now expect to spread. Aides say Mr. Reagan is determined to explain to any doubters what the Marines are doing in Beirut. Chris Wallace, NBC News, at the White House.
Syrian and Iranian government spokesmen tonight denied that their governments had anything to do with those suicidal attacks on the American and French barracks. We'll have more on the Beirut massacre story, including the families of the dead Marines and congressional reaction when we return.
Coming up, John Hart in New York with the stories of Marine families. Brian Ross in Los Angeles on the DeLorean tape flap. And Stan Bernard in Beirut on the anger and despair of Marine survivors.
This has been a terribly traumatic time for the families of Marines stationed in Beirut. Those families have spent hours in front of their television sets near the telephone, not knowing if their Marine were dead or alive. Today, the Marine Corps began to notify the families of those Marines that they have been able to identify. And tonight, John Hart has the story of some of the families.
The only way to get to us is by helicopter now. You could say we were in the middle of it all. If it happens again, we will get a lot more, that's for sure.
Mrs. Jean Giblin of Providence, Rhode Island, reads the most recent letter from Lance Corporal Don Giblin, age 21, who is in Beirut, with his brother, Lance Corporal Tim Giblin, age 20. She does not yet know if this letter is the last.
They say we should hit the state by December 8th, and by the time we have done cleaning our gear, it should be Christmas time. I can't wait. Donnie would write home, said he was tired of being shot at and jumping into the foxholes because he couldn't shoot back. And Tim would write and say, Ma, I don't know what we're here for. I don't understand it. He said, I tried to read up on it, he said, but it's not our war.
Brian is fine, honey. He's okay.
In South Bend, Indiana, Peggy Bayshore is on the phone with her husband, Ralph, a truck driver who is on the road in Iowa. Lance Corporal Brian Bayshore is 20.
And a photographer in Beirut was talking to several of the boys, because we even saw on news, and they were giving, these boys were giving the photographers their home telephone numbers so they could call their parents and relay the message that they were okay.
Private First Class Roy Relvis, 19, of Philadelphia, was due to leave Beirut November 9th. He was killed Sunday. Today his father said he told him not to go.
I talk every day. Roy, don't go. Roy, don't go. Every time tell me, Father, I go.
If it's help, something, you know, but it's no help, you know. It's no help. It's a waste the lives, you know, so many lives already.
In Minneapolis, Lance Corporal Jay Tishmack's girlfriend read his last letter on the day his family was told he died Sunday. He was 19.
And this one he said to me, I can't wait to come home for Christmas. You know, I miss you so much. He said, I'm scared down here, but I just know everything's going to be okay.
Jay said he'd be home in 30 days. I got a letter from him today. Well, Jay is coming home. Not.
John Hart, NBC News.
Next, John Dancy at the Capitol on Congress and the Marines.
Fresh troops to replace those Marines killed and wounded in the Lebanon massacre were on their way to Beirut tonight. The first elements of the 300-man force from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, stopped in West Germany before resuming their flight. As the planes were refueled, the Marines were taken to air base mess halls for their first hot meal since they left the United States last night. Some of these Marines are going back to Lebanon for a second time since the multinational force was sent there 14 months ago. And many, while not afraid, they said, did express concern about returning to Lebanon. There was a lot of concern this day in Congress as well, as member after member rose to question the role of the United States in Lebanon and what might happen if the Marines are pulled out. John Dancy is at the Capitol tonight.
Congress is still groping, still trying to understand the enormity of what has happened and how to deal with it.
If we were to pull out of there today, in my opinion, it would be a victory not only for Syria, but would be a victory for Russia.
It is not an East-West confrontation. If you term it as an East-West confrontation, then we better not just send a couple Marines there.
The analogy of Vietnam came to the minds of many. Minority Leader Byrd misspeaking, calling Lebanon Vietnam.
And we ought to do everything we can to hasten the departure of our boys from Vietnam.
Congressman Clarence Long tried a Vietnam-era technique, introducing a resolution to cut off funds for the Marines in an effort to force a pullout.
We stayed in Vietnam for 10 years because we didn't have the guts to accept the fact that we had a defeat coming up.
The administration sent Secretary of State Schultz to the Capitol. He tried to reassure Congress the remaining Marines are being adequately protected. Kennedy of Massachusetts was not reassured. He charged that someone had been negligent yesterday.
Negligence by the situation which effectively permitted only 1 century to be between the 2,000-pound bomb and sleeping American servicemen.
The bombing and administration policy in Lebanon are rapidly becoming a political issue. Majority Leader Howard Baker is aware of that.
For the time being, what I intend to do is keep my mouth shut and urge others to do the same.
The only agreement here today seems to be that the United States ought to make it safer for the Marines in Lebanon. Beyond that, many senators are worried that the United States will get involved in another Vietnam, but most have no clear idea on what to do about it. John Dancing, NBC News at the U.S. Capitol.
And Marvin Kalb is at the State Department tonight, where Secretary Schultz is reworking his schedule. Marvin, I gather that the Secretary is now preparing to rally American allies.
Yes, Tom. He's going to leave by the end of this week to meet urgently, as it's put, with the foreign ministers of France, Italy, and Great Britain in order to coordinate their policies better on the multinational force. He implied during those talks up in Congress today that there may have to be more Marines sent to Lebanon. He said he would try to get other countries to contribute forces as well, and perhaps beef up 2 existing United Nations groups there.
Were you surprised today when the president made this such an East-West confrontation that he took on the Soviets so directly?
I have to say I was not surprised. Every single time a president requires an acceptable justification for any kind of military or diplomatic action that is risky, the safest course is always to invoke the East-West Soviet-American confrontation. As a matter of fact, he also, and the Secretary of State as well, attacked Syria. And at this point, even if the attack is justified from a diplomatic point of view, it's very difficult to get Syria's cooperation, which is required to get reconciliation in Lebanon at the same time as you're attacking it every day.
Any change, do you think, in the role of the Israelis now in Lebanon?
A high-level mission is going to Israel, and what they're trying to do is to coordinate military strategy between the U.S. and Israel in the event of a wider conflict.
Marvin Kalb, thanks very much. The French, with the second largest peacekeeping contingent in Beirut, suffered the second most casualties yesterday in that suicide attack on their paratroop base. The French lost at least 23 dead, 35 more are missing tonight. In Pau, in the French Pyrenees, the flag flew at half-staff at the headquarters of the 1st Paratrooper Regiment. That's where most of the Frenchmen killed yesterday were trained. Base phones rang constantly. One who died, 21-year-old Jacques Howe. He lived in a village just a few miles from the base. And some who knew him, like the town grocer, were stunned and talked among themselves, trying to figure out why it happened. For several weeks now, NBC News correspondent Stan Bernard has been practically living with the Marines in Beirut, sharing with us their personal hopes and fears in his Lebanon Diary. Tonight, a special edition of Lebanon Diary, The Survivors.
The survivors. They have had some sleep and have washed away the dirt and the smells of digging through a mountain of rubble for their fellow Marines. They have not been able to wash away the emotional exhaustion.
Among the first of the rescue party on the scene were 2 Vietnam vets. They talked to us about their feelings and impressions, and they said they had never seen anything like the destruction and the carnage of yesterday.
And I froze. I stopped and just stared at the horror that was in front of my eyes. I said, oh my God, and the fright that I seen, and the people that were screaming for help, that were pinned underneath tons of cement, was unbelievable.
There was still the lingering smoke, of course, from the concrete dust. Everything was in pretty much of shades of gray. kind of like an old black and white photo, if you can imagine, just no color at all.
For these vets, Lebanon has become much more difficult than Vietnam.
There, we could fight back. We went out into the jungles, we run our patrols. Here, we're in a peacekeeping role. Our job here is not to engage with the enemy or with the outside factions. So it's a completely different role, and it's a hard role. It's a hard role of restraint. If I'm going to die, I don't mind dying. I want to be able to fight and know that I contributed something. But when you see human life wasted the way it was yesterday, why didn't they come right at us instead of being the low-down way they did it?
Sergeant Lang was wounded in the blast, and his anger is building as he thinks about the friends he lost.
I thought of their families, what their wives are going to be thinking, what are the American people going to say about it. I truly feel we're here for a good purpose.
You want to stay?
Until the job is done, yes. That's why we're here.
Stan Bernard, NBC News, Beirut.
That's Nightly News for this Monday night. I'm Tom Brokaw. Good night from all of us at NBC News.